I sold your land for $300,000. Now, I can finally move abroad and live the good life with my girlfriend."
He looked at me with narrowed eyes and a cruel smirk, his face twisted into something predatory, as if savoring his victory over me. The mocking expression on his face made all the strength drain from my body. I couldn't believe this was real, my reality. Was all the kindness I thought I saw in him nothing but a facade? With a loud smack, he slapped a document onto the table.
"Take a good look. It's all done. There's nothing left for you here. Oh, and by the way, I did you a favor and already got rid of all your stuff. Your hobbies were so pathetic, I couldn't stand to have them around."
Even my late mother's jewelry, treasured keepsakes, had been treated like trash by him. But maybe, in some twisted way, this was my fault too. If I'd been more understanding, more in tune with his feelings, maybe this wouldn't have happened. The sales contract on the table showed my land had been transferred to a company I'd never heard of. I felt my knees buckle, the weight of it all threatening to bring me down.
"You're worthless. The only thing you had going for you was that piece of land. Oh yeah, and I called your job too. They said you're done. Don't bother showing up tomorrow. They don't need anyone like you who just drags the whole office down."
I tried to move my trembling lips to tell him about his father, but no words came out. His cold, cutting voice smothered mine before I could speak.
"There's no use trying to change my mind now. She's the complete opposite of you. She's young, gorgeous, and comes from a respectable family. You're nothing compared to her, plain, boring, and dull."
Where had that gentle smile from our high school reunion 12 years ago gone? But think about it, maybe even that smile had been a lie. The pieces of my marriage were crumbling right before my eyes. Maybe I had just been too blind to see it coming all along. I had ignored all the signs, the way his heart had drifted further and further away.
"A useless woman like you doesn't need any property from her family. Pack up and get out by tomorrow."
The sound of the front door unlocking echoed through the silence. My name is Ariel Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I had met Ryan through a mutual friend. Discovering we attended the same high school had sparked a connection, and before I knew it, we were dating, then married. Ryan had always been outgoing and a bit carefree, but he'd been fun to be around. I believed we could build a happy life together. But married life was nothing like I had imagined. Ryan had a careless approach to money, something I hadn't realized until after we tied the knot. It was only after the wedding that I learned how deep the issue ran. He'd hidden the fact that he'd been racking up debt since his college days.
"Don't worry, it'll all work out."
His relentless optimism left me shaking my head more times than I could count. No matter how hard I tried to save, his spending habits canceled out all my efforts. Even so, I endured it because we were husband and wife. But there was another problem that weighed on me, Ryan's relationship with his father. Ryan's father, David, was a serious and strict man. Naturally, he clashed with Ryan's laid-back attitude and reckless behavior. Even as an adult, Ryan barely spoke to his father, and their distance only grew after we got married. When David remarried 5 years ago, after Ryan's mother passed, Ryan's resentment hardened into outright refusal to engage.
"I can't stand the idea of that woman using Mom's things."
David's new wife, Claire, had been a close friend of Ryan's mother during her time as a nurse. Claire, warm and considerate, had supported Ryan's mother through her illness and continued to care for David after she passed. She had even helped me prepare for my wedding, offering words of encouragement when nerves threatened to overwhelm me. That's why I couldn't understand Ryan's refusal to visit his father's home. "Your dad's come over here a few times. Why are you always so cold to him?"
"What does it matter? I don't have any family that mean anything to me anymore."
That's what Ryan said. I had desperately wanted the two of them to reconcile, but Ryan's stubbornness never wavered. Amid all this, my father's health took a turn for the worse, and he had to be hospitalized. Dad had been living with my older brother, Adam. After Mom passed, Adam had taken care of our family home and the land. I tried to visit as often as I could, but work kept me from going as much as I wanted. "Dad, are you doing okay? Don't worry about me, just focus on living your own life." Dad said this with a smile, but seeing how frail he looked broke my heart. Then one day, Adam called me.
"Ariel, I need to talk to you about something."
Adam's voice was heavy. "What's wrong?"
"Dad's condition is worse than we thought. The doctor says we need to start planning for what comes next.
I was at a loss for words. The pain of losing Mom came rushing back. I didn't know what to do. I just listened to Adam fighting back tears. That night, I decided to talk to Ryan. My dad's condition isn't good. I'll need to visit the hospital more often.
Yeah, that sounds tough.
That was all he said. No concern, no follow-up. He just kept scrolling through his phone, brushing me off. Hey, can't you at least act like you care?
It's not my problem.
Of course it is. He's family.
Your family, not mine.
His words chilled me to my core. After 2 years of marriage, I thought we were a family. But maybe Ryan had never felt that way. For the first time, doubt started to take root in my heart. Then, my father passed away. The hospitalization had dragged on, and I thought I was prepared, but when the end came, the sorrow was suffocating. On the day of the funeral, I returned to my family home with Ryan. Adam and I worked through the preparations, greeting a steady stream of mourners when David and Claire arrived. David stood silently, his face stoic, while Claire, her eyes glistening with tears, gently held my hand and said, "This must have been so hard for you." Her kindness nearly brought me to tears. But the moment Ryan saw his father and Claire, he slipped away into another room. I always knew Ryan didn't get along with his father, but avoiding him even at a time like this? That was a new low. Feeling embarrassed by Ryan's behavior, I lowered my head in apology to David and took it upon myself to make conversation.
You don't need to apologize for him.
David's voice sounded weary. Then he told me something unexpected.
Actually, my neighborhood is being rezoned, and I've been asked to move out. It's a company house, so I won't even get compensation. I'm at a bit of a loss about what to do next.
I glanced at Adam in surprise, and he nodded, confirming that he'd known about this for 6 months. It seemed Adam and David had already been discussing it for some time. I wondered how Ryan would react to this news, if he even cared. The truth is, Ryan had been acting strange for about 6 months. One day, while borrowing his phone, I stumbled upon intimate messages between him and an unfamiliar woman. At first, I thought it must be a mistake, but the messages were far too personal. "Can't wait to see you again," and "last night was amazing" were phrases that made my heart sink. Since then, his weekend overtime became more frequent. He came home later, and his clothes often carried the faint scent of women's perfume. Whenever I tried to tell him I felt lonely, he dismissed me coldly with, "I'm busy with work, deal with it." Our conversations dwindled to almost nothing, and we often ate our meals separately. Even so, I tried my best to trust him. But when I noticed I was carrying more of the financial burden, and Ryan would fly into a rage if I asked where his paycheck was going, my suspicions solidified into certainty. When I confided in Adam, his face turned grim.
"Ariel, do you really trust Ryan?"
"What are you trying to say?"
"I mean, by the way he's been acting, it seems like he might be cheating on you."
I was momentarily at a loss for words. But I wanted to argue, but the messages on his phone, the scent on his clothes, and his changed behavior all came flooding back, leaving me speechless.
"You need to seriously think about your future. Choose a path that'll make you happy."
Adam's words hit me hard. A few days later, after discussing it with Adam, we decided that I would inherit the piece of our family's property located in a residential area about 30 miles away. However, Adam was wary of Ryan and firmly warned me,
"Whatever you do, don't let Ryan find out."
I heeded Adam's advice and told Ryan that I had inherited something less valuable. Ryan exploded in anger.
"Why the hell wouldn't you choose the land?"
"It's my inheritance. Why are you so upset about it?"
"Never mind, it's nothing."
At that moment, my heart completely shut off. I was now certain that Ryan cared more about what I inherited than about mourning my father's death. That harsh reality pierced my heart deeply. It felt as though I was standing at a point of no return. I began to seriously consider what to do next. For the time being, Ryan seemed to fully believe my lie about the inheritance, and I felt a brief sense of relief. Every time the topic of inheritance came up, he'd interrogate me so thoroughly, it felt like I was being examined under a microscope. Still, I hadn't expected him to be so easily deceived. Considering how suspicious he usually was, I thought he'd demand evidence or press me harder for details. When it all played out, it almost felt anticlimactic. But more importantly, I had managed to protect something valuable on my own terms. Up until now, it had been second nature for me to play a passive role in my relationship with Ryan. Ryan made all the decisions, and I simply followed. Even when I felt something was off, I didn't argue. I just swallowed my discomfort and carried on. I knew that pushing back would only lead to trouble, but this time was different. I had acted on my own will and safeguarded something precious with my own hands. As a result, I had successfully kept those critical documents out of Ryan's reach. This small victory sparked a confidence within me that I had never felt before. Building a cooperative relationship with my father-in-law gave me much-needed strength and solace. While Ryan still despised his father, I could never see him as a bad person. If anything, I found him far more rational and fair-minded than Ryan could ever be. At the very least, he had a clear sense of right and wrong and wasn't someone easily swayed by emotion. My father-in-law decided to lease the land I had inherited to build his new home. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement for both of us. Owning a piece of land so far away wasn't practical for me to use on my own, yet I wasn't willing to let it go to just anyone. That's why leasing it to my father-in-law felt like the perfect solution. After all, it was empowering to work with someone who respected and understood my decisions. I wasn't alone anymore. For so long, I had felt isolated, but now I realized that wasn't the case. Not long ago, I was merely someone who obeyed her husband. I wasn't even allowed to have my own will. I just floated through each day. It had become so normalized that the idea of change never crossed my mind. But I changed. Inheriting this land was the catalyst. I had acted on my own and achieved tangible results for the first time. And there was someone who acknowledged that. This fact alone strengthened me. Ryan, however, seemed completely unaware of my transformation. That in itself was a relief. If he realized how much I had changed, he might try to reassert control over me. He might even resort to more extreme measures. But right now, he believed the land didn't exist. As long as he thought I hadn't inherited it, his attention would be focused elsewhere. I felt reassured. Finally, I thought I could have a bit of peace. That peace, however, was short-lived. While sorting through my father's belongings, I realized that the diary, his official seal, and the other related documents my brother had given me were missing. At first, I thought it must have been a simple mistake on my part. Maybe I had rushed and forgotten where I'd stored them. I decided to check the safe places again, carefully. But no matter how thoroughly I searched, they were nowhere to be found. Even the envelope I had used to store them in had vanished without a trace. My heart began to race, pounding erratically in my chest. This doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be like this. I checked everywhere, the back of the shelves, inside every drawer, even the storage boxes in the closet. Still, they were nowhere to be found. A suffocating sense of dread gripped my throat, and my fingers began to sweat. Someone must have taken them. The first face that came to mind was Ryan's. I didn't want to believe it, but if anyone would do such a thing, it would be him. Determined to find some evidence, I rushed into the living room. Ryan was lounging on the sofa, casually scrolling through his phone while sipping coffee. Seeing him so relaxed, as if nothing had happened, sent a wave of cold despair through me. More than anger, it was sheer hopelessness. I approached him quietly, trying not to make a sound, and asked in a calm voice, "Hey, where are my dad's belongings? What did you do with them?" Ryan lifted his head up from his phone and gave me a brief glance. "Huh?" He replied lazily, raising one eyebrow as if my question wasn't worth his attention. But when he noticed the seriousness on my face, he stared at me for a few seconds before bursting into laughter. "What are you even talking about?" Feigning confusion, he shrugged, his dismissive tone fueling my growing irritation. I stepped closer, positioning myself directly in front of him. "Where are they? Those were important to my dad." Ryan set his coffee cup down on the table with deliberate slowness, rolling his neck as though dealing with me was an unbearable chore. "Important, huh?" He smirked, his tone casual, as if he were talking about something utterly insignificant.
Oh, you mean the property? You told me that you didn't inherit it, but I realized you were lying to me, so I sold it.
It felt like something snapped deep inside my head. What? What did you just say? My thoughts couldn't keep up. No, it wasn't that I couldn't understand. I didn't want to understand. Ryan seemed utterly indifferent to my confusion, casually pulling a cigarette from his pocket and placing it between his lips. The sharp click of his lighter broke the tense silence, and a thin stream of smoke began to curl lazily upward.
I told you, I sold the land.
I felt the blood drain from my face.
$3 million.
My mouth went dry, and it felt like a heavy lump was lodged in my throat.
I guess I got lucky.
Ryan exhaled a puff of smoke, chuckling as he flicked the ash carelessly onto the floor. Noticing my stunned expression, he shrugged, feigning nonchalance.
So yeah, we're done here.
Before I could fully comprehend his words, Ryan threw something onto the table. Divorce papers.
I've decided it's time for us to get divorced.
I stared at the papers, the bold black letters almost mocking me as they spelled out the end of our marriage.
I'm moving overseas with my new girlfriend.
That was the final blow. I could feel something inside me crumble, as though the foundation of everything I'd built my life upon had been ripped away. He pulled the crumpled papers from his pocket, tapping them with his finger for emphasis before thrusting them toward me.
Go on, sign it.
The papers landed on the table with a cold, lifeless thud. The bold, dark ink seemed to burn itself into my vision. Ryan's name was already signed, bold and clear. I slowly raised my gaze to meet his face. There it was, that smug, self-satisfied smirk that I had grown to despise. A surge of anger and despair rose within me, like a tidal wave. My throat was parched, and my heart pounded erratically in my chest. The old me would have screamed, cried, begged for an explanation. I might have grabbed his arm, shaken him, and demanded a reassurance. I might have shouted, "This isn't real, is it? Tell me it's not real." But not now, not anymore. I said nothing. I just stared at him, unblinking. Ryan, clearly unsettled by my lack of reaction, tilted his chin upward and continued speaking.
You know you've done a good job putting up with me all these years, but it's time to move on. There's no reason for us to stay together anymore. I've got a whole new life waiting for me.
I closed my eyes slowly, drawing in a deep breath. No more. I wouldn't let his words control me any longer. Feigning composure, I let out a small, derisive laugh. Oh, so I guess you don't know, do you? Ryan's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. That land? Your dad's building a new house there. His expression froze instantly.
What?
His voice was a mix of disbelief and suspicion, teetering on the edge of panic. He looked at me as though I had just spoken in a foreign language. I told you, your dad's already signed an agreement to lease the land. So there's no way you could have sold it legally. Ryan stared at me blankly, as though his brain refused to process my words. But a second later, he lunged for the divorce papers on the table, crumpling them in his fist in a fit of panic.
You're lying. That can't be true.
His tone dropped sharply, the cold edge of desperation creeping in. His unease was palpable, bleeding through every word. I'm not lying. My brother and your dad decided during the funeral, and everything's already finalized. I deliberately adjusted my seat with an air of calm, letting him stew in his own mounting dread. Seems like no one thought to tell you. Ryan's eyes darted wildly, searching for something, anything that would disprove my words.
But that can't be true.
You think your dad wouldn't do something like that? Well, you're wrong, because he would. And he did. His house is being torn down for redevelopment, remember? So of course he needs a new place to live. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. I studied his face, watching as realization began to dawn, the cracks in his confidence widening. There was something exhilarating about watching the carefully constructed facade of control he always wore crumble in an instant. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone, frantically scrolling for any shred of evidence to the contrary. But his fingers seemed to betray him, tapping the screen again and again without success.
Not even your brother said anything about this.
Of course he didn't. This was between me, your dad, and my brother. I watched as the color drained from his face, his confidence unraveling with each passing second.
You were planning this all along, weren't you?
Well, you always made it clear you didn't care about the land I inherited, didn't you?
Ryan shot to his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is bullshit. There's no way this is legal.
It's completely legitimate. The contracts are signed, and everything's filed properly. His eyes widened as he tried to piece together a plan, something to salvage his crumbling scheme. But no matter how hard he thought, the facts wouldn't bend to his will. I stood silently, slipping on my coat with deliberate ease. Well, I'm off to City Hall.
What? Where are you going?
Isn't it obvious? To file these divorce papers. Ryan looked completely dumbfounded, his mouth hanging open. I walked to the door, slipped on my shoes, and grabbed my purse. Goodbye, Ryan. And with that, I left the house without a single glance back. Ryan stood there frozen, unable to utter another word as the door clicked shut behind me. A few days later, Ryan came back, but something about him had shifted. The sound of the front door slamming open echoed through the house, sharp and jarring. Heavy, hurried footsteps pounded down the hallway, and the living room door flew open with a crash.
Hey, what the hell is going on?
Ryan's voice thundered through the room, his tone brimming with frustration and desperation. I remained seated on the sofa, slowly lifting my gaze to meet his. He was breathing heavily, sweat glistening on his forehead, his composure completely shattered. In his trembling hand were several crumpled papers, held tight as if they were his last lifeline.
They said the land was void. What the hell does that mean?
His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine as he stormed closer, radiating panic and fury. I let out a slow sigh, shrugging casually as if he had just told me the weather forecast. Of course it was void. That land was mine after all. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. Ryan's face turned pale, the weight of my words hitting him like a freight train.
But I had your signature. It was right there.
You forgot, didn't you? My words cut through his feeble defense, and his expression darkened immediately. I allowed a knowing smile to creep onto my lips, relishing the sight of his growing panic. Did you really think something like that would work? Forgery on legal documents? That's the kind of thing people go to jail for. Ryan stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar as the reality of the situation began to sink in.
No, you don't get it. I've already borrowed money.
And what does that have to do with me? My calm tone seemed to twist his face even further in despair.
I took out a loan to move abroad.
His voice cracked as he practically screamed his confession, desperation lacing every word. Then what exactly do you expect me to do about that? I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. That's your problem, Ryan, not mine. We're no longer married anymore, remember? Ryan's face crumpled in despair as he clutched his head, rocking slightly where he stood.
No. What am I supposed to do now?
I stayed silent, watching as he raised his head to look at me with pleading eyes.
Please, at least cancel the lease agreement with my dad. I'm begging you.
His tone softened, almost breaking, as he tried to win some shred of mercy. It was clear he was attempting to use pity as its final weapon. Don't be ridiculous. My sharp retort caused his face to contort in frustration and disbelief. You tried to sell the land behind my back. I'll be reporting this to the police. As I spoke, the remaining color drained from his face, leaving him looking ghostly pale.
Wait, hold on.
He opened his mouth to protest, but my icy glare silenced him instantly. Oh, and I'll be filing for alimony and compensation for your affair, so be prepared for that as well. His entire body went rigid, the last traces of resistance draining from him.
This can't be happening.
He opened his mouth again, but the look on my face seemed to convey all he needed to know. He stopped mid-thought, slumping in defeat. It finally hit him. I was serious, and there was no escaping the consequences. His eyes darted around the room, and a cold bead of sweat trickled down his temple. You always were good at making everything about you. For a moment, he just stood there, stunned. Then, his entire body began to shake as he stumbled backward.
Damn it!
He muttered the words under his breath, fumbling with his shoes before bolting for the door like a man fleeing a burning building. The door slammed shut with a resounding thud, leaving the room eerily quiet. The sound felt like the definitive end of something deep within me, a severing of ties I had once believed unbreakable. Once Ryan's presence faded entirely, I took a deep, shuddering breath, letting the tension in my chest release. My shoulders sagged, the tight coil of stress that had gripped me for so long finally unwinding. At last, my life was mine again, free from his lies, his control, and his betrayal. A few days later, I received a call from my father-in-law, David.
"Ariel, do you have a moment to talk?"
There was an unusual weight to his voice, a gravity that immediately put me on edge. Of course, is something wrong?
"Actually, I just wanted to let you know that Ryan's been changing. A little, but it's something."
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan changing? It seemed impossible to imagine him as anything but the selfish, manipulative man I'd come to know.
"He started a part-time job recently and is earning his own living expenses."
I was shocked, but at the same time, a tangle of emotions swirled within me. Are you serious?
"Yeah, it seems like he's actually serious this time."
If Ryan was truly trying to change, maybe that was a good thing. But after all the ways he'd hurt me, forgiveness wasn't something I could offer lightly. Meanwhile, I was steadily rebuilding my life, piece by piece. The rent from the land I had leased to David started coming in more steadily than I'd expected. I put most of it into savings for the future, focusing on living modestly and carefully rebuilding my world. Though the wounds Ryan had left behind still lingered in my heart, they felt more distant now, like echoes of a life that no longer belonged to me. During this time, David came to me with a new proposal.
"Ariel, don't you think it's time I introduce you to someone new?"
I hesitated at first, unsure how to respond, but I gave it some thought. Maybe you're right. David's consideration warmed my heart, reminding me that I wasn't alone in starting over. The man he introduced was calm, kind, and had an air of sincerity about him. We began to carve out time to get to know each other, one step at a time. There was a sense of comfort and tranquility in our conversations that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Was this the first step toward something new, toward healing? I didn't have the answer yet, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. Meanwhile, my life continued to stabilize, each passing day feeling more secure than the last. The land lease agreement with David was progressing smoothly, and I had found myself more involved in the planning than I had anticipated. Through our conversations, I grew to appreciate just how diligently and sincerely David was handling everything.
"Ariel, this isn't just about building a house. It's the first step toward creating a future."
His words sparked a sense of possibility within me, a glimpse of something brighter ahead. Occasionally, I would hear updates about Ryan, but they no longer felt relevant to my life. Apparently, he was still living with David, trying, however clumsily, to rebuild his life.
"He's finally starting to understand just how foolish he's been."
Hearing that gave me the smallest sense of closure, though it didn't erase the pain he'd caused. Even so, if he truly was trying to change, I suppose that was something to be grateful for. One day, as I settled further into my new life, I agreed to go out with Michael, the man David had introduced me to. We visited a small art gallery in the city, discussing the pieces on display as we walked through the quiet halls.
"This painting has such warmth to it. It feels calming just to look at."
It does. The soft tones really make you feel at peace. Talking to him felt natural, and I realized I was relaxing without even thinking about it. Later, over coffee at a quaint little cafe, we began to share bits of our lives with each other.
"Ariel, I imagine you've been through a lot to get where you are now."
His words caught me off guard, but the kindness in his eyes encouraged me to open up. That's true, it wasn't easy. But I think everything that happened made me who I am today. He nodded, listening intently, as though every word mattered.
"That's incredible. Not many people have the strength to reflect and move forward like that."
His words warmed my heart, a reassurance that my journey had value. From that day on, my time with Michael began to take on deeper meaning. Over the next few weeks, Michael and I began texting often, and it soon became routine to spend our weekends together. The time I spent with him brought a sense of peace and fulfillment that had been missing from my life for so long. One day, as we strolled through a park, a memory from my past surfaced unexpectedly. I used to come here a lot, back when I was first married.
Really? What kind of memories do you have here?
I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to answer, but I didn't want to lie to him. Back then, I thought I was happy here, but now I realize it wasn't real happiness. He didn't try to dismiss my feelings, he simply nodded quietly.
Your past is part of what makes you who you are now. Don't think of those experiences as wasted.
His words lifted a weight off my shoulders, even if just a little. As our time together continued, I began to realize I could start imagining a new future. Meanwhile, Ryan's life remained harsh and unforgiving. He lived a bare-bones existence in David's house, taking on temporary jobs to chip away at his mounting debt.
Ryan, this is probably your last chance. Whether you turn your life around or not is entirely up to you.
Those words left him speechless. He merely lowered his head and trudged off to his next job. One day, while working at a construction site, he got injured. It was just a twisted ankle, but it was enough to prevent him from returning to the physically demanding jobs he relied on. David took him to a doctor and let him recover at home, but Ryan spiraled into a deep depression.
Whether you give up now will decide everything about your future.
Those words became Ryan's final anchor, the only thing keeping him from completely falling apart. My life, on the other hand, continued to flourish. But David's new home project was steadily taking shape. Every time I visited the nearly completed house, I felt a surge of hope. This house isn't just a building. It feels like a symbol of new beginnings.
Exactly. We can't erase the past, but we can build a new future.
Those words resonated deeply within me, a reminder of how far I'd come. My relationship with Michael was also deepening, one step at a time.
Ariel, how about we go somewhere next weekend? I thought we could explore someplace new.
That sounds wonderful. I would love to discover some new places with you. His suggestion filled me with a renewed sense of hope for the future. The season shifted from winter to spring, and the once icy air began to soften, carrying with it a sense of renewal. To celebrate the completion of David's new home, I began preparing for a small gathering of family and friends. It was the first time in a long while that I genuinely looked forward to something. Michael, can you help me with this? I'd like to add more flowers.
Of course. How do you want them arranged?
Watching him carefully place the flowers, I couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just a new house, it was a symbol of new beginnings. Meanwhile, Ryan's life was also beginning to shift, albeit more slowly. He had started to listen to David's advice and spent more time reflecting on himself.
What you need is the courage to act. Even if you fail, as long as you can learn from it, you can start over.
Taking those words to heart, Ryan found work at a small local business. At first, it was just menial tasks, but he worked diligently, one step at a time. As he showed his willingness to change, David's stern demeanor gradually softened. The gathering at David's new house was filled with warmth and lively chatter. Friends gathered around the food, laughing, while David proudly showed them around his new home. I've been wanting moments like this for so long, peaceful with everyone looking so happy.
Then let this be just the beginning. There's plenty of time to create more memories like this.
His words filled my heart with warmth. Later, Ryan made an unexpected appearance at the gathering. He seemed calmer than before, quietly laughing as he talked with David. I approached him, speaking to him directly for the first time in a long while. Ryan, it's been a while. I'm glad to see you're doing well.
Ariel, I truly messed up. I want to apologize again.
In his eyes, I saw genuine regret and gratitude. That's all in the past. Let's move forward from here. At that moment, I truly felt I had let go of everything. As the gathering wound down, the sky turned a vibrant shade of orange, painted with a stunning sunset. The view from David's garden felt like a declaration of a new chapter in life. I gently held Michael's hand, grounding myself in the hope that had taken root within me. Thank you. Let's keep building this new life together.
Of course, Ariel. Let's create the best future together.
And so, I overcame my past and took the first step into a new life. Several months have passed since that day, and my new life is finally taking shape. The land use project I started with David is progressing smoothly, and the income has become a steady stream. Thanks to that stability, I've been able to start pursuing a dream I've always wanted to fulfill. Michael, look at this. The blueprints for the cafe just came in.
That's amazing. What kind of concept are you going for?
I've always wanted to create a cozy space where people can gather and connect. I want to serve coffee and light meals made from local ingredients, creating a space where the community can come together. To make this dream a reality, I've started learning new skills and partnering with local farmers. In my personal life, I've found quiet but profound happiness. My relationship with Michael has deepened, but on mutual respect and unwavering support.
Ariel, today's a special day, isn't it?
Yes, it truly is. He looked slightly nervous as he pulled a small box out of his pocket.
I want to rebuild the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?
The tiny ring in front of me felt like it wrapped my heart in warmth. Yes, of course. Tears welled up as I took his hand, and in that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. I occasionally hear updates about Ryan as well. He's continued his local job and recently started volunteering.
Ryan's changing little by little.
Hearing that, I couldn't help but smile a little. I'm sure he'll find his own happiness someday. There was a calmness in my voice that I hadn't known before. On the day of the cafe's opening, David, Michael, and my new friends came to support me. The cafe named Ariel's Story symbolized my fresh start. The space was filled with warm laughter, and children happily enjoyed their sweets. This is my place. I want to cherish it forever. Carrying my past wounds, I've learned to turn them into strength to move forward. And so, my new life truly began.